The UK government now taking aim at messaging apps demanding access to encrypted messages after it was revealed that the assailant in last week's London terror attack used WhatsApp just minutes before committing that heinous crime. Joining us now is Joseph Steinberg. He's a columnist at Inc. and CEO at Secure My Social. Joseph, it's great to have you here. Let's get started. You think personally that allowing the government to have backdoor access to encryption that people use day to day overall is a bad idea, despite criticism from the other side that says it's necessary to overall security? Tell us why.
Well, first of all, I'm not convinced that it's necessary. I think there are many things we should be doing before we talk about compromising people's privacy. But the bigger question is, you talk about the government having a backdoor. There's absolutely nothing that guarantees that it will only be the government that uses that backdoor, and that's a very big issue.
Okay, so talk to us about the end-to-end encryption now baked into WhatsApp and exactly maybe how the government could get access to this. I think for many people that are using some of these apps, if there is end-to-end encryption, they just think, well, it's just safe. I'm okay.
Right, and that's what WhatsApp wants you to believe, and that's how WhatsApp has designed its product to be safe. The encryption that's used on WhatsApp allows you to encrypt the message on your device, and it's not encrypted until it gets to the recipient's device, which means WhatsApp doesn't have access to the data. That's part of these governments' problem. They know that they can't send a warrant to WhatsApp and demand the materials because WhatsApp would be giving them encrypted data because that's all it has access to. That's good for the consumer. It's bad for law enforcement. But it's good for privacy. And the real question is where the trade-off happens. It's obviously in the government's interest to have access to all information, but it's not in the interest of people. And there's another factor that comes to play, which is any backdoor that gets created could be used by another government. If somehow the keys to a backdoor are leaked, backdoor meaning some way that allows the government to go in and decrypt sessions with a special, let's call it, master key. If that were leaked and, for example, the Russian government got it or the Chinese government got it, that meant all messages in the United States would be potentially decryptable by a foreign power, and that's a big concern.
Well, Joseph, let me ask you this. In a recent piece that you wrote for Inc., you mentioned that the real issue with encryption backdoors, you wrote, quote, "It's a danger to freedom, not a mechanism of combating crime." Walk us through specifically why you think on the crime fighting end, it just isn't even really that effective of an overall means.
Well, there is information provided by reading everyone's sessions, but there are other ways to combat crime. In each of the terrible terrorist attacks that we've had in recent years, there have been reports that came out afterwards that there were other warning signs that should have been noticed that wouldn't have involved infringing on people's privacy en masse. In the case of the Paris attacks, for example, there were reports that the Turkish government tried to warn the French government beforehand, but that there were communication breakdowns. There are many things we can do beforehand. On top of that, when you have an encrypted chat session, there's still metadata, which means the government can still find out from WhatsApp that person X spoke with person Y at time A from place B. So there's still plenty of information the government can get, and from that it can get physical access to data and probably physical monitoring of people that would give it better data than it would by decrypting. And the trade-off with the backdoor is just so significant. If that would end up in the hands of the wrong party, it could be catastrophic, not just for business, but for any government use of the technology as well, because there are people in the government who use these type of technologies to communicate, perhaps informally, but still, we don't want foreign powers to have access to their communications.
Joseph, I think that for consumers, still the biggest case regarding this and the government's role versus the tech role is the Apple case that happened in the spring of 2015. And so now with the changing of the guard and the Trump administration in place now, when it comes to tech companies that are global companies saying that they want to protect the consumer, do you think that it's going to be easier or harder to do that going forward now?
Well, the Trump administration so far and the Republicans in Congress seem to be leaning more towards the free market than towards protecting people's privacy. We're seeing that with the current matters related to internet providers themselves being able to look at traffic and sell it, perhaps, or sell the data from it. But a lot of these things are to be determined. What happens geopolitically around the world could affect these things in a big way. I think the United States, there's still going to be a lot of pressure not to monitor people's communications. No matter what the government starts talking about, there'll be a lot of lobbying and a lot of pushback. So I'm hoping that that will keep our communications private, but that doesn't mean that every democracy around the world will preserve those types of protections, especially if, God forbid, we have more terrorist attacks.
Fascinating stuff, and certainly a very crucial debate that is happening right now. So we thank you for joining us. Joseph Steinberg is a columnist at Inc. and the CEO at Secure My Social. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you for having me.